Once upon a time, there was a beautiful and gifted fairy who watched over all the people and places and animals and things that lived on the farthest star. This fairy brought so much goodness to the star she watched over, all that lived on the star were happy most of the time. Occasionally, as comes up anytime and everywhere, someone on the star would have a complaint. But complaints were never much of a problem because everyone knew they simply had to go see the fairy and tell her their complaint, and she could immediately make things right again. Just how she was able to do that was something nobody quite understood, yet all appreciated how smoothly she made things run, how easy she made their lives. One day the fairy was awakened from her afternoon nap by the sound of a murmur, like the sound of bees humming. She looked outside but saw no bees, nor anything else that might be producing the sound, so she ignored it, but the murmuring did not go away. Instead, hour by hour, it grew louder. All night long it grew louder, and by the morning, the murmur was everywhere. The fairy stepped outside, and now she could see the source of the sound. All the people who lived on the star had gathered, and the murmuring was coming from them. Everyone was saying, "This has to stop," and "We can't stand this anymore," and "Somebody needs to do something right now." The fairy waved her arms and fluttered her wings to silence the murmuring so she could understand why her whole star was unhappy and complaining. Someone standing near the front of the gathering, in response to her asking, "What on star's name is wrong?" replied, "It's that old man. He won't stop saying that." "Well, what old man, and what is it that he's saying that has so upset you?" "It's the old man who sits on top of the church steeple. He just sits there and keeps asking the same question, 'Why?' He's ruining our lives." The fairy was eager to restore peace and quiet to her star, so she set off right away to find the problematic old man. Sure enough, she spotted him before long, for he was hard to miss, a kindly-looking man with a white beard, perched on top of a church steeple, gazing all about and saying to anybody who came near, "Why?" We learn early on, shortly after we start talking as small children, to ask questions. And the most common question we come up with is, why? Why questions are how we figure out the way the world works, the explanation for the behaviors of others, the cause of hurt or pain. And of course, we carry our why questions into whatever churches or temples or religious institutions we may enter, because those are the settings, above all, for the biggest why questions we can imagine. Why is there evil in the world? Why do people die? Why is this, whatever difficulty we may be struggling with, why is this happening to me? Why doesn't God, if there is a God, fix this? Make the world right, stop bad people from winning, help good people do more. The sorts of people who make their way into a Unitarian Universalist congregation often come with stories of experiencing their why questions shut down. Sometimes they've been silenced by variations on what our parents told us when they grew weary of our asking why, namely, "You'll understand when you get older," or "just because that's the way it is." The religious variation of such responses might sound like, "God works in mysterious ways," or "We'll understand one day when we all get to heaven." And if we persisted with our why questions, we may have heard something in those religious institutions more pernicious, like, "Your faith will help you understand. And if you don't understand, then clearly you don't have much faith." Or sometimes we may have heard that our questions were undermining the faith of the people around us. The theme of our September worship services is faith, an often misunderstood term that because of that misunderstanding is even something we Unitarian Universalists have occasionally been accused of lacking. The misunderstood version of faith says that faith is belief, or faith is holding fast to a set of propositions about how God and people in the world work. We sometimes talk of having faith as though it is some sort of spiritual possession that magically makes things all right. But those are wrong-headed versions of faith and what it means when it first showed up in stories and myths and spiritual writings before institutions got hold of it and turned it into something quite different. Faith is a quality of being, a way of regarding the world and others, a capacity for living in the midst of uncertainty, a willingness to step into ambiguity without needing to resolve everything. There is nothing about faith that includes particular beliefs. And questions, far from being harmful to faith, actually serve to strengthen and expand it when they come from a spirit of curiosity and a desire to explore. Faith is not afraid of what is unexplained or unpredictable, for faith comes with a deep trust in what is mysterious. I grew up in the Southern Baptist tradition and discovered early on that questions were mostly not welcome, especially the why questions. Even after I was given a book which would explain how many of the miracles in Bible stories actually could have happened according to science, even after I persisted with questions and began to hear critical replies suggesting I lacked faith, I kept asking, until one day my parents sat me down to tell me that a classmate of mine had been killed in a car accident. And then my questions took on a whole new level of urgency. I needed some framework, some way of understanding the death of another child in order not to drown in overwhelming fear. Sometimes our questions can be a kind of sport in which we want to dismantle what another person believes, and in doing so, prove how superior we are. Sometimes our questions are simply curiosity, and sometimes our questions are deep and desperate, questions we ask when nothing in our lives makes sense anymore. And the painful reality is that those are precisely the questions that don't get answered, or that receive answers implying we lack faith, as if somehow this magic element of faith holds the answer we seek. And faith does hold the answer we seek, and faith does not hold the answer we seek, and yet it does. After a couple of decades of building a good life, living in a home which actually had the classic white picket fence and a dog, being married and having a child, my good life steadily began to fall apart. I found myself sinking into a quagmire of mounting legal bills as my estranged husband and I fought over custody. I could not find more than occasional or part-time ministry positions unless I was willing to move, yet moving would mean I would surrender custody. And I was coming to the hard realization that ministry was probably not my calling after all. But I had no idea how to make a living in some other way. The fog of depression surrounded me most days. After hearing me complain about the state of my life and how hopeless it all looked, and that even my beliefs in spiritual practice helped not one whit, A longtime friend suggested I might need to go out somewhere and yell at God. It seemed an inspired idea. And I literally did just that. I drove into the countryside and a little ways down a dirt road that was intended for farm equipment to get into a large cornfield. There was nobody around for miles, no people, no farmers, not even drivers going by on the highway. I got out of my car, at first a bit self-conscious and just speaking aloud, but in short order ramped up into yelling at the top of my lungs at the sky. The one question most of us wants answered when life has backed us into a corner. Why is this happening? Why are you, whoever you might be, doing this to me? Why me? Much to my disappointment, the heavens did not crack open. No thundering voice came down. Nothing happened whatsoever. My throat grew tired with the effort, so I returned to my car and drove home without the answer I had so desperately wanted. Yet an answer was there, just not in the form I was looking for. The answer was actually all around me already. The answer was not an explanation that might have given me exactly what I needed to take charge of my life, some grand perspective that would make everything make sense. The answer was there is no why, at least not the sort of why that would satisfy me. The answer was live through this the best you can. The answer was don't fail to notice all the help that does surround you. The answer was don't underestimate your own capacity for coping. The answer was take the energy you're spending trying to control things and make them bend to your will of how you want them to be, and put that energy into playing the hand you've been dealt. Or an answer sort of like that. I had no words that answered me why. But after that time in the cornfield, I did realize I was starting to notice little openings here and there, possibilities I had overlooked, small things I could pursue, and especially the amazing care of people all around me. So long as I kept insisting on an explanation, a justification for what was happening, so long as I wanted that why answered, I had not seen all the answers that were just waiting for me right there all around. Once the fairy had located the little old man whose constant asking why was so annoying the people on her star, she flew right up to him, and after introducing herself, politely asked him to stop saying why. The little old man perched on the steeple smiled at the fairy and responded, as you might guess, why? The fairy was taken aback and raised her voice, insisting that he must stop saying that word so that her people could go on with their lives in peace. But the little old man smiled even more broadly and said, why? Now the fairy was thoroughly angry at the man's refusal to abide by her simple request, so she resorted to a threat. If you say why one more time, there will be consequences. You will fall off this steeple, and who knows what condition you'll be in when you hit the ground. So stop saying why right now if you know what's good for you. And the little old man gazed into the fairy's eyes, his own eyes twinkling, and he replied with a bit of a laugh, why? The consequences the fairy had warned about began to unfold. The little old man tumbled off the steeple and fell through the air, through clouds, past the sun and the moon and the stars. He fell and fell and fell until he finally stopped falling and came to rest in a meadow of soft grass. And he was no longer an old man, but a young and beautiful child. This story by poet E.E. Cummings that he wrote for his daughter ends here, with the God figure and the why question all coming down finally to a child. Which maybe is what happens ultimately to all our questions, the ones we ask out of curiosity, the ones we ask when exploring a matter, the ones we shout from a deserted cornfield, the ones we whisper through tears in the night. Asking why is a primary act of faith, a way of facing the mystery that is all around us and not marching forward into it as an effort to get answers and get control, but falling backwards into it, much as our young people showed us earlier, as they fell backwards without looking to make sure somebody was going to be there. In faith, we abandon efforts to control and replace them with a trust that can feel almost childlike because it is so lacking in control, so dependent on there being a person there to catch us, a meadow of grass where we can land safely, people who love us enough to stick with us when our lives come apart without fixing things, but simply listening as we keep saying, I can't stand this anymore. Faith envisions a universe that does not hold answers for us, but does offer us no shortage of supports, often from people and in ways we tend to overlook when we're still on the hunt for answers. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Which comes first, the question or the answer? German philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein looked at the usual sequence we expect in a conversational pattern of questions and answers and claimed the sequence did not unfold as we might assume. I ask a question, you provide an answer. That's the order of events I expect to see. But Wittgenstein insisted that an answer is present at the outset, that in fact a question only becomes possible when there is a pre-existing answer. So my usual sequence of question leading to answer is in Wittgenstein's view reversed as a sequence of answer leading to question. If I can pose the question, Wittgenstein believes, I must already, on some level, in some form, know the answer. Not necessarily the literal answer, but a more profound answer. And if as Unitarian Universalists, we are people who generously embrace the question, maybe even see questioning as one of our primary spiritual practices, then maybe we're also the people who hold real answers, not easy ones, not literalistic ones, not ones that others have handed off to us, but ones that rise from our willingness to live and love in the midst of ambiguity, holding faith in ourselves, in one another, in the mystery that is present always. Why? Why this? What does all this mean? We cannot give a tidy answer to those questions, but we can answer them through our lives and in our actions as we're willing to fall and catch one another again and again. And in all our falling and all our catching, we learn to live more decently and love more fully. May it be so.